Are we?
What's going on, guys? It's Mohammed, the host of Aware Alpha, and welcome to episode 77. Guys, ladies, I'm excited, fired up, and grateful as usual. Some days, you look at the world and the things that's happening in the world, it's hard not to be grateful. And myself being somebody that practices gratitude on a daily basis, I am just super grateful. Some days it's crazy to think back that last year, this time, there was maybe a couple of listeners to the podcast. And for me, I was simply just sharing what was on my heart, what was on my mind, and the journey that I was taking through healing and the things that I was doing. And last couple of months, as I've started to bring guests onto the show, it's been amazing to talk to individuals that are maybe on the same journey as me, might have been on the same journey as me a long time ago, and now they're sharing their perspective on how they went through this. And today is just another special day. I have somebody very special on the show today. As I was looking through his Instagram the last couple of weeks, it was just, for me, my heart was already fully had made the decision that I'm definitely going to bring this individual onto the show. And I'm going to say a little about him, for you guys to get a perspective of who he is. So he goes by the name of Paul Spinelli. And I'm just going to read a little bit about him before I bring him onto the show. So Paul Spinelli believes that we all seek security, safety, and connection. After overcoming adverse childhood trauma and unhealthy relationships, including heartbreak and loss, he drove headfast into healing journey to discover who he truly is. That journey brought increasing wisdom and lessons for finding self-love and self-worth. He enjoys storytelling and writing about healthy and unhealthy relationships and their impact on our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. He believes in loving ourselves first, that all relationships reflect self-worth and self-love. Today, Paul pays forward these lessons as a life coach, writer, and an advocate. He's also pursuing his master's in marriage and family therapy, and will be launching his first book soon. So with that being said, welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Mohammed. Very excited to be here.
I have a question right off the top of my head as I was, just thinking right now, is what is your definition of an unhealthy relationship and a healthy relationship? What does that look like for you?
Oh, you're coming out of the gate with that. And that's a fantastic question.
Thank you.
Because I think so many of us don't even recognize that we experienced something that was unhealthy for ourselves until, sometimes years later.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to have awareness around that. And this is also just my lens, right? So I think it is a little different for each of us, especially because I truly believe that we all love differently. We all have different relationship needs, and there's many different types of relationships out there, right? So defining a healthy relationship, I think, is a bit more complex. But if we were to really make it simple, I would say that you would want to be in a relationship where someone's creating a safe space, where you're able to be seen, where you're able to be heard, where your perspective matters.
Yeah.
Are they trying to listen to you because they want to change you or use your words against you? Or are they trying to listen to you because there's a genuine desire and level of authenticity where they want to study your scars, right? They genuinely want to know what your triggers are.
Yeah.
They want to know what your experiences are and how those experiences shape the individual that they're sitting across from. So I think that's a healthy relationship. And I think we complicate it by attaching the word love to it. And an unhealthy relationship is a little bit of what I shared in there, but it's also, it could be emotionally, physically, mentally unhealthy. It's usually manipulative.
Yeah.
It's usually walking on eggshells. I always like to share that our body recognizes where we are in an unhealthy relationship long before our mind and heart do, right? That anxiety, that nervousness, and sometimes that happens on the first date. We anticipate or interpret that as butterflies in our stomach. And really that's our body recognizing that someone who is in close proximity is a bit triggered, right?
Yeah.
And a relationship that lacks reciprocity, That is the biggest indicator. So if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're giving more than you're receiving, you're probably in an unhealthy relationship.
That's so good. You said something about studying somebody that's interested in studying your scars. I love that. That's something I have never heard before. And you nailed it. A healthy relationship is, being heard, seen, understood, and listened to, and someone that holds space for you, right? Now, that all sounds great, right? The thing is, though, that if I grew up in a family, in a very dysfunctional family, which most of the listeners know I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. And so if I grew up in a dysfunctional family, never really witnessed a healthy relationship. I'm 31 now. When I grew up, let's say, same thing, never really witnessed a healthy relationship. And all of a sudden, I get in a healthy relationship with someone that's making me feel heard, seen, understood, all the stuff like that. But because I don't know what that feels like, I'm just totally shut off, probably turned off, probably think this is boring, and kind of just go the opposite way. So now, what does one need to do to be able to realize and understand that they're in a healthy relationship? Like, how do growing up in a very, never witnessed a healthy relationship, how am I supposed to know when I'm in a healthy relationship? Because I'm probably triggered when I first start to get in there, right? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love the question, Mohammed. And man, listen, who hasn't experienced trauma in childhood, right?
Yeah.
I had a therapist once tell me that was the role and responsibility of every parent, traumatize their child, right? So, and I'm a single dad. I'm a father myself of 2 kids. It's always at the forefront of my mind. Is what am I doing or not doing that may be correlative to traumatic experience for them? Because trauma, I think when we hear the word trauma, a lot of people want to associate that to something of significance, something that's lasting, right? Was he physically or she physically abusive? Or were you in the military where you experienced something absolutely horrific? And if not, then you don't deserve the right to say that you have trauma, right? Your parents didn't kick you out of the house at 7. They didn't lock you in a basement. And so I think we sort of really misconstrue what trauma is. And so the first step is really identifying and understanding and recognizing where and when those traumatic events occurred in your life, as far back as you can go.
Okay.
And understanding those and studying those could then help to put together the puzzle of who makes Muhammad today and what's in that puzzle, right? Because we're all beautiful pieces of a puzzle that gets ripped and torn, and it's got jagged edges, and we try to put one piece in a section where it doesn't belong, right? And that's life. That's us. That's the beauty of life, is all of us are just doing the best that we can, and there's a lot of missteps. And so you want to really understand the trauma. You want to put it together. You could do that with a coach, with a really great therapist, and get intentional on the type of therapy. This last summer, I spent 17 sessions in what's called Emdr, which takes a look at traumatic experiences and sort of remaps them in the brain. So there's a ton of beautiful modalities that can offer support. But that's the biggest thing, I think, is recognizing when and where it occurred, what meaning you attach to it, and is it something that you seek? For me, I was taught that love is chaos. And so you hit the nail on the head, right? So I was very drawn to emotionally unavailable partners. I was and I felt safe in that because I was able to give more than I was receiving. That was always okay. That was my pattern. That was normal, right? I was always attached and attracted to partners who were very volatile, right? There was a lot of high EQ. Everything was hot and cold, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, lots of uncertainty. And so I loved into that, right? Thinking that my love would be enough. But I had to really, really reconstruct all of those thoughts and all of those narratives that were planted here as a child and rebuild that blueprint. And it requires the ability to go backwards before you can go forwards.
Interesting. It's just crazy. Like what you said is so true that, at the end of the day, the thought that comes to my mind, I like to really like, it's interesting. Sometimes I'm thinking something while my heart is like thinking something else. And I'm like, which one should I express? And the thought that comes to my mind right now is, so when I started my healing journey in the last 5 years, I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And after that, it just kind of just opened me up, right? And it therapy, you know, a lot of just work. And I went through a whole year where I just literally, through my meditation, I just cried. I would be crying for an hour, 2 hours, and just like letting it out. And I was well aware enough that this is repressed emotions being expressed, or it's my inner child wanting to talk to me. So I was able to express and just let it out. I was never shy of it, right? But at the same time, at one point, as I was going back in my childhood, I realized that when I was about 5, I started to cry. And actually, my sister told me this, and my dad was like, just like slapped me and told me, "Men don't cry." And my older sister's like, "I never seen you cry again until then." Like from when I was 5 to where I'm 31, where in the last couple of years I've gone through just right. So the thing that comes to my mind is, how normal is it to cry, and how okay is it to cry? Because a lot of men are raised to like, it's not okay. Like it's not manly and nothing good about it. But yet the most masculine, most aware, most successful, most happiest men that I know are ones that will tell you, express your emotions, cry if you have to. Have a band of brothers around you that are willing to hug you and hold space for you for those times, right? So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on crying and how okay is it, or like I'm just really curious to hear, because a lot of guys that listen to this podcast, I talk about crying and expressing your emotions and all these things, and how masculine and how embodied it makes you if you're expressing yourself in those, comparing to if you're not expressing it and you're suppressing those emotions.
Yeah, beautiful, man. And I'm honored that you asked this question, because this is very correlative to a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is this very complicated understanding of what makes toxic masculinity. And you had mentioned you're 31, Mohammed?
Yeah, 31.
Yeah, 31. So I just turned 38 at the close of this year.
Awesome.
And this past year rather. And what I found at this stage of life, and I don't know, you might be a little too early into it being just 31. What I found at this stage of life is the dating pool becomes very complicated, right? There's lots of individuals who are through divorce or still in, right, the divorce process, the separation process from a court perspective, right? And then it's a question of if they have kids, and if they don't have kids, they either want to rush that or they definitively don't, right? There's a lot of firm no's, there's a lot of black and white, a lot of firm boundaries that are brought, and there's a lot of previous stories that come into this life that didn't exist at 21 or 28, right? You know, you could still dream big, you could still think about the wedding and the kids, you know, maybe one day we'll have kids in 5 years. But you know, at this stage, all of those thoughts have already been decided, right? And so what I'm finding is, especially for men, there's a lot of coaches out there that are very insistent that what makes masculine frame is a secure man. And a secure man doesn't ever communicate their emotions, right? A secure man doesn't ever give too much away. A secure man constantly keeps the woman guessing, right? A secure man is never going to tell the woman that they cried while they were meditating, right? Because that's not a secure man. And in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, like those voices stop. They need to silence. That's what's contributing to this narrative of toxic masculinity. It's actually precipitous to causation, and it's creating a compound effect, because the reality is all of us have emotion. All of us. Emotion does not know pronoun. Emotion is not assigned, based on gender at birth. It's not. It doesn't change when we ebb and flow through life and decide we're something other than, right? We all have fear. And what's part of fear? Anger, right? We all have sadness. We all have joy. And so if we suppress one of those emotions, what will happen is something very similar to what you experience. Is when they do finally release, it's very eruptive, right? It's like shaking a can of soda and then opening it.
Like a
Right?
volcano.
Yeah, exactly. So I really love and admire that you, in your healing journey, you've reconnected with that emotion. It's a beautiful emotion. It serves a purpose.
For
One of
sure.
the things I share with a lot of individuals who will always ask, especially those who are experiencing a massive amount of sadness and heartbreak and loss, will always say, like, I just wish I wasn't so sad. I'll always say, just embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
Let it flow through you,
Mm-hmm.
because that sadness is there to serve a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And where that balance is, where that fine line is of when it's no longer serving a purpose, I
Mm-hmm.
would say is when it starts consuming your entire being, when
Yeah.
you can't experience any other emotion, and when you can't function. And
Mm.
that's a part of the grieving process. So that will happen, whether it's a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months of any significant loss. We often will get paralyzed, right? Returning to work will feel like an out of body experience. Talking to friends will always be midnight phone calls with lots of sadness and tears, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the joy will disappear for a while. But as long as that joy shows up again at some point, whether we find ourselves singing in the shower or
Mm.
laughing at a friend's joke, right? Or just smiling because we just enjoyed a really good cup of coffee and we finally remember what that feels like and tastes like,
Mm-hmm.
then there's no concerns on you being sad up to that point.
So very well said. I'm curious, tell us a little about pretty much your story, make it just childhood, last, you said you're 38, right? So it's just like you are talking about self-love, self-worth, how important it is, healing journey and all these things, which is very common for a woman these days, an online coach that's a woman that talk about it. It's very normal because yeah, it's a woman, but like to find guys that are talking about self-love, self-worth, the importance of communication skills and relationships, and how important the relationship with ourselves is, because that is the foundational relationship, right? So like, how did Paul get here?
Uh, um, how much time do we have, Mohammed?
So we make it as condensed as possible here.
Yeah, I was going to say this will have to be a series. How did I get here? You know, there there were definitely some significant events that occurred in childhood. Um, my dad, was an individual that was very assertive, very authoritative. Right, it was his way or the highway.
Yeah.
Kind of methods similar to your dad. He wouldn't necessarily hit me and say, "Boys don't cry," but there was a lot of shaming.
Mm,
I definitely never felt safe to cry in front of him. You
mm,
know, and it was very a labor of love. Right,
mm,
that was the way to my dad's heart. It's kind of, what did you do for me today?
yeah.
And then it was never good enough because he is a master perfectionist,
Mm,
right? So I could have like waxed his vehicle with a toothbrush and the finest wax possible
mm,
for 18 hours, right? And he would just come out and be like, "Well, you missed a spot," and then
mm,
walk away, and that would be it, right?
yeah.
And so it really planted seeds of doubt, planted shame, and he was and physically and emotionally neglectful and abusive as well.
Mm,
Um, and so that was really tough, especially hitting that stage of teenage years,
mm,
right? Where I'm trying to now figure out, well, who is Paul, right?
mm,
What do I like? What do I not like, right? How do I pursue someone I find attractive? How do I answer, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Because
mm,
that seems to be a question a lot of kids get asked in high school. And then I had a mom who, because my dad very much required sort of acts of service. I had a mom who was always in a state of busyness, always in a state of serving others,
mm,
and that was always a very anxious state for her, and it
mm,
just radiated out, right? So we were always late. It was never enough, right?
mm,
Um, and because of that, she struggles with being present.
mm,
Um, and so that dynamic really taught me that emotional avoidance was a thing. That dynamic taught me, because I never really heard, hey, it's okay to cry. I never really got hugged when I was sad. I never really got hugged and heard, hey, great job, I'm so proud of you, right? So I had to learn all that through my peers. And then in 8th grade, I was sexually assaulted. And then high school was high school. There was a lot of very complicated things that continued, right? My freshman year was the infamous Y2K, right? So I'm coming out of this sort of this sexual assault from an older male, trying to figure out, right, and hiding in the hallways of high school because he's there. And then we hit freshman year of high school, where it's touted by everyone that computers are going to fail to recognize the year 2000. ATM machines are not going to work, right? The world's going to shut down and go black as we know it. And so that was sort of, and my birthday is on December 29th, right? And so I just remember, as I'm turning 14, just laying in the bottom bunk of my bed, praying to God to just make this go away, right? Like, if he would just save us, I promised that I would do good, and maybe he could just give me a family of my own one day, and I could show him, that I could change this experience that I had, right? And then junior year of high school, I was in an automobile accident where I was legally blind in my left eye. That vision has since returned. And then senior year was 9/11, right? And so I had 5 years in addition to the family system, or my parents, right? I had 5 consecutive years that are very formative years for anyone. That just continued to pound me in the sand and encouraged me to believe that nothing good is everlasting, nothing is ever safe, and that the world could end at any moment. And so when it didn't, I then became very rebellious and just thought, I'm going to live every moment as if the world is going to end, because tomorrow's not promised. And so my 20s were very selfish and pretty destructive. And there was 2 significant adult relationships, one of them being the mother of my kids, that lasted 6 years. And when that ended, I found myself at 33, 34 for the first time ever, sitting down in a therapist's couch. And that was really where my healing journey fully started. Looking at all of those experiences, I joined, similar to what you shared, I joined, men's groups and weekend retreats. I went to Sedona for a spiritual experience. I've done, Native American sweat lodges, constantly trying to figure out meditation, failing, read tons of books, and I was working in my undergrad in psych at the time. And so everything that I was pursuing, was really focused on growth, looking in the mirror. And I came out of that experience 2 years and a month later, and I sat down on a date, and I thought I met the one. It was 6+ hours. We shut down a restaurant. You talk about lightning in a bottle and chemistry. Oh my gosh, that was the most magnetic experience of my life. And it ended as quick as it started. It was a brush fire. It just, until it was gone and she was gone. That was about 6.5 months, and and it just built very quick and ended very quick. And the way in which it ended caused me to really hang on longer than I should have. I could not understand how to let go. I'd posted today on my Instagram something about, right, not understanding how to let go, and that was one of the thoughts. I just couldn't figure out how do you let go of someone you love dearly, right? And so I'm very blessed and grateful that experience was sort of the final domino to keep me in therapy, put me into trauma therapy, which is where the Emdr work came in. Really look at all that, all the trauma and boxes and adverse experiences I had in childhood that you don't often share with a talk therapist, especially when you come and say, hey, mother of my kids and I are separated, right? And I'm really sad. And that becomes really sort of the topic at hand. It's very
Yeah.
rare that a therapist is going to go, well, tell me about your childhood, right?
Mhm.
And so I thought I had healed. I thought I reached this place of healed when I started that relationship.
Mhm.
The timing too, right? The intentionality, all the men's work and workshops and spiritual retreats.
Mhm.
And then when that relationship ended, I realized there's no such thing as healed,
Mhm.
and the work is only as good as we as our level of vulnerability is.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just pursued every box in my basement, man, and wanted to really dig in and figure out what was creating these patterns. So your opening question, I was there a year ago.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Amazing. I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. That was super beautiful to hear, and just to witness, what Paul went through and where you are today. A question. So when you said you start therapy, so what was it like, your decision, or was it like where it was suggested by your peers and your family and close people in your life, where you're like, maybe, you know what, it's time for you to go into therapy and kind of figure out yourself out more? Or was it yourself where you got to a point where you're like, I just have a lot of things that no one else can help me with. I think the therapist would be one to maybe give me some awareness on why I am where I am. So how did that happen?
Yeah, good question. It definitely was not. It was not friends, and it was not family. My dad actually said that he thinks therapists are quacks, and I remember looking at him and saying, "You do realize that's what I'm in school for, right? Like that's what I'm pursuing."
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it wasn't actually. It was initially it was out of selfishness. So when the mother of my boys and I split, we had attempted couples therapy. I think we did, gosh, like maybe 5 sessions, 4 or 5 sessions, which I think, if I remember correctly, reading a stat, like 4 to 6 sessions is the make or break.
Mhm.
And we were like right there, and it broke. And so selfishly, I had pursued it um, with the thought that, hey, I'm going to show her, right, that
Mhm.
I'm willing to do this work, and
Mhm.
I'm going to change for her, and
Mhm.
so she'll want me back.
Mhm.
And yeah, and that turned into I still meet with that individual to this day.
Mhm.
Um, so that turned into really exploring a lot of things.
Mhm.
But that was the initial driver. And then I found that in that experience, I became very communicative, especially for the first probably year or so.
Mhm.
Whenever someone would say, "What's up?" I was often triggered and I would cry. And
Mhm.
so I would tell them, so and so and I split up.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what it's going to look like to be a father. I'm
Mhm.
not really sure how often I'm going to get to see my kid.
Mhm.
Um, and even to random strangers, I just vulnerably ripped the band-aid off in any captive audience I
Mhm.
had, I would share.
Yeah.
Um, and that was both a little healing, but it was also it was my first experience in realizing that there is a responsibility to normalize this work.
Mhm.
There's a responsibility to reach out to our friends, our family members, and say, when they ask what's up, what's new, how are you, to say, hey, right, I just had this amazing session in therapy. Because
Mhm.
I think that, especially for men, right, women are more eager and more courageous to pursue a therapist than and I think the more we as men can have that conscious conversation, right? And say,
Mhm.
hey, right, this is the event that occurred. This is how I responded, and I freaking love it. This is
Yeah.
where it's helping me, right? This is how it's helping me heal, help and helping me grow. Because universally, we all have stuff we've experienced, and we can all
Mhm.
benefit from someone creating that safe space for us. And chances are, if the reason why you're sad or you're hurting and you're struggling to let go, if any of that is correlative to a relationship ending, you now no longer have that safe space and that safe
Mhm.
person, even if they weren't, right, because the perception was there. And
Mhm.
so there's now an even greater need to get yourself
Yeah.
therapy and sit down, because that therapist is your greatest advocate. Yeah.
Yes. No, it's so true. I'm a big fan of, brotherhood and having good men in your life that can hold space for you. And I'm very grateful for that. I have, an amazing inner circle that's been along the way. But at the same time, I have consciously put the time into these relationships. I have given into these relationships, right? So it's like vice versa, right? And I actually host a men's circle every 2 weeks where I do. So I have, from 60-year-olds to 25-year-olds come, and it's interesting as I hold space for these different types of men, and I start to witness how important it is to have that brotherhood, to be able to share it and what's going on in your heart and your mind and everything that's going on, right? It's sharing is therapeutic, like sharing is therapeutic all on its own. So you started to do this work. Now, like if someone wants to, call you or ask you, or we were sitting in a conversation and I'm like, Paul, just got out of this relationship, or, I've just been crying lately, or I'm emotionally, something is wrong. Like what would be some practical things you would get someone to do to start to heal their childhood trauma?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would, the first thing, oh God. So it's so based on the individual, first off, right? Because we are all at such a different place. And the type of relationships we experience is also going to really determine our experience, right? But if I would have to say, is there sort of like a strategy or a formula? So some of it include, the first thing is, I really want the individual to feel seen and heard. I want them to share. I want them to tell me, hey, I was up last night staring at every single photo of my ex, even though I told you last week I deleted them.
Yeah.
Like I want that level of vulnerability, because if we don't have trust, and they don't feel safe enough to let me know when they're experiencing those moments of limerence, those moments of really kind of dancing in their past, and we can't move forward, right? And so it's okay to ruminate. We all do it. We all do it. So that would be the first thing, is really sort of assessing the individual. Some strategies or tools or tips is being intentional with communication, right? So like I'll always set a boundary of, hey, if you want to text your ex, text me first. I'm never going to tell you, well, maybe not never. Once again, this depends on the individual, right? I might not tell, I may most likely will not tell you to not send it, right? But I think sometimes we need that initial dopamine to know that we can type something and hit send. And then when we revisit it later on in the day, there's usually a lot less emotion attached to it, or the desire changes, right? So view me as sort of that person. Second is write as much as you can, or as little as you can, right? I'm not going to tell you to journal every day. If you do journal every day, that's fantastic. If you don't, there's other ways to heal. But journaling is a great way to get the thoughts on the paper. It's a great way to start recognizing when you're experiencing a certain emotion. What time of day, what were you doing? Where were you at, right? What were you thinking? What were you looking at? So we can help each other unpack and uncover those patterns and those trends, right? And then the third thing is really looking at that person's lifestyles, right? Are they sitting on the couch, going through tubs of ice cream and Grubhub and watching romantic comedies and still pawning over their ex as they stare into their phone and look at every text message sent 3 months later? Like, we probably need to change something, right? So I love a body in motion creates motion, right?
Yes.
So let's look at your lifestyle. Let's look at your habits. I'm not going to tell you that, I'm going to help you get a six pack in 90 days, right? And then your ex is going to want you back. But if we could get you up off the couch, if we could get you moving, go outside, go on a walk. It doesn't have to be anything intense. For me, I love to CrossFit. So a minimum of 4 days a week, that's part of my therapy, because I believe it's a healthy mind, body, and soul. And those are the three modalities that I look at when serving others and coaching others.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that you, like the first one that you shared, that, just really, someone comes to me, it's like, where do I start? How do I start healing this childhood trauma? Is actually listening to them, like just finding out where they are, how they got here. And that actually builds some trust with that individual as well. Like you're able to just actually help that person, right? By just simply listening and finding out what they're going through. And then the second thing you mentioned, which was journaling. And I'm so grateful when I do these interviews and when I hear answers that I do myself already implement in my day-to-day life. And I'm like, yes, I'm on the right track. I've been journaling for 5-6 years, and I do different journaling. Even through my coaching, I call it compassionate journaling. So I have a gratitude journal. I have where I write my ideas journal, and I have a journal where I literally just journal my life. Like today, like before this podcast, I wrote down like 12:30, it's 12:30 here, right? It was 12:25, about to jump on a podcast with Paul, feeling super grateful. So like I can go back from 2016, open a journal and literally find out what I was doing that day, that date, that time. And it's been beautiful because one of the things that I'm a big fascinated with is self-reflection. And I feel like a lot of people don't do enough self-reflection, self-reflect on an idea, self-reflect on a date, self-reflect on last year, and really sit with yourself and just reflect on that. What happened? What went wrong? What did I learn? And it's interesting, on my own personal journey, self-reflection actually always just makes me more grateful, because I look back to where I was and where I am. It's just hard not to be grateful for the journey that I've been on myself. And so, yeah, journaling, I'm a massive advocate for journaling, I would say, because yeah, like it's so therapeutic to grab a journal and just sit there and just write, and it's interesting actually right now, like as we're talking, journal number 1, journal number 2, and I have one over there and I have one on my desk here. But like I say, like I journal a lot because, and it's interesting, as I've started to do these things, I call them superpowers now, because whenever I'm off, whenever I'm not feeling like, I journal, I sit for an hour and meditate, I take a long bath, and I call them my superpowers because like, boom, I feel right, amazing, better, good every time. So it's like, how could I not use my own superpowers? You know what I mean? Like these are like, yeah. So because I like that, because I try to romanticize my experiences through the words that I speak. So if I'm like, oh, I'm feeling off, like I got to do some journaling, like I got to do some meditation. No, like I look at it as if like, yo, I should do some journaling. Like, you know what that does to me, right? I should sit for an hour meditation. Like, you know what that does to me, right? Because I know every time I come out of it, I feel much better. So I've turned that, like the perspective of like, no, it's like, I also work out and all those things, but it's like, I remember way back in the day where I'm like, oh, working out, like I got to do working out. No, now it's like, oh, I'm going to go work out because I know how good I feel when I'm done the workout, right? So yeah, no, I love that you shared that about journaling, everything like that. It's interesting, like when I talk to guys on this podcast, and for me, like it's also therapeutic, because like I am just witnessing another individual sharing their story, and being a male body, it's like, it just helps me, it's like, I'm like, yeah, see, I'm not the only one out there. There's so many other men that are doing this work, right? One of the things that comes to my mind right now is, for yourself, like, do you meditate?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask this because I had listened to a couple episodes of your podcast. I thought, oh gosh, I don't. I've meditated, especially when I was going through this last relationship. That was a part of the Emdr. It was sort of homework for Emdr, right? But it is not a consistent practice. Okay. It's one that I wish I could. But yeah, it's one of the modalities that I have a massive difficulty shutting my brain off and focusing. And that's where the writing becomes such an outlet for me. That's where the journaling becomes an outlet for me, right? I can sit in silence, I could sit in quiet. But to actually like really just sit and focus, that has always been my greatest weakness.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. And it's always good to analyze, right? So it's like to asking the question, what part of me is so resistant to sitting with myself, right? So it's like, and then like,
well, I don't even think it's a resistance to sitting with myself. I think it's just Um, gosh, so I have a really good friend that had joined this men's group
Mm,
for the kickstart of January,
mm,
and he had asked me if I would join, and I had well, as soon as I listened to the expectations, I was like, look, like this program sounds amazing. I
mm,
get it, but moment of integrity here, right? Like that is not something I want to commit to right now,
mm,
and so I think for me, it's a deficit that I want to turn into a strength. I
mm,
also give myself so much grace,
mm,
realizing there's a lot going on, right? So I'm launching this business. I'm in meetings for website development. I'm meeting with my editor for my manuscript, right?
mm,
Um, Managing all my Instagram, which I just launched in December, right? So
mm,
it's sort of a baby step into social media for me, which prior to I had no connection with whatsoever. My editor was just like, "You're crazy, like you have to do this."
yeah.
um, CrossFitting 45 days a week, raising two kids as a single dad, and one of them special needs,
Mm,
full-time career on top of all that other stuff,
yeah.
in sales and marketing, right? And
Mm,
and I'm also a full-time college student, pursuing my master's in counseling, right?
mm,
So when I look at all of those things, you mentioned a bath yesterday. I took one and totally passed out in it.
mhm,
Um, that to me is sort of how I choose to meditate in this season of life, where
mm,
I know that there's too much sensory, there's too much thought, so I need to shut down the mechanism, right?
mm,
And I don't need to necessarily sit there and do it, but I know when I've hit that threshold
mm,
what my rituals are. So it'll either be sitting and journaling,
mm.
taking a bath with some salts and oils, and
Nice.
listening, to either Reiki music,
Mm,
uh, going to get a massage, right, or doing Reiki therapy, or just burning a candle and
mm,
connecting with that scent, right, and getting triggered by that scent.
mm.
Um, so there's all of those things, but
Yeah.
yeah, that
No,
is
you
that is
got
hands down a gap right now.
it sounds like you really have the good rituals already that you're doing, right? So it's like the fact that you're also still doing all those things, it's amazing. For how important do you think it is, like this concept of self-love? Because it seems like it's a very foreign concept for the people, most people, even for myself, it was a foreign concept for a long time until I started to realize that, like, how could I, like, I want this divine queen, that loves me and cherishes me, and it's all there. And then I got to a point where I was like, do I love myself the way I want that woman to love me? And the answer was absolutely no. It was absolutely no. I was not loving myself the way I wanted to be loved by this divine queen that I'm manifesting into my life, right? And I've been blessed to just have an amazing woman in my life all my life, really. I was always a flirt in a way you could say, right? But the level and the caliber of the woman that I've continued to manifest into my life has just got higher and higher, from, meeting in my 20s somebody that drinks and smokes, to now, talking to lawyers and surgeons and business owners. And, just like, that's a kind of gives you like the work, right? But self-love, and how important is it? I'm curious to hear your thoughts because of what I just shared, because I found out that I was looking for a love outside that I was not even given myself yet.
Yeah, I love that. I want to take a step back before I answer that question,
Okay.
because it's rooted in the, hey, are guys allowed to cry, and when is it too much?
Mm,
Um, we all have a yin and yang is masculine and feminine energy.
yes.
We all have that inside of ourselves.
Mm,
So that queen that you want to uh, you know
manifest.
manifest. Thank you. Yeah, first cup of coffee. So thank you. That's already in us, right?
Mhm,
And I think this is where the idea that everything we have already exists inside gets a little confusing sometimes, right?
mm,
Because we're so attached to the external. And God knows I fall for it myself, right?
mhm.
Like it's great to know that I could give it to myself, but I want to huddle up against something that's not a pillow, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we all long for, and especially I'm physical touch
Mm,
as one of my love languages,
yeah.
right? So we all long for the external,
Mm,
and that's okay. It's is it, it's not okay when the external becomes more important than the internal. It's not okay when the external starts taking away from the internal. It's not okay when the external becomes that false idol, right? Where we neglect ourselves, where we stop meditating every day and journaling in our multiple journals, right? Because we just don't have time, because we'd rather go, Netflix and chill with our queen. Because if we're not there on time, she's going to be really upset, right? And so I'll just journal tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's not okay, right? So one, recognize that that energy is already inside of you, and two, that I think is my answer to how important self-love is. Massively, it's everything. It's everything. I wrote yesterday, our capacity to love others is only as good as our capacity to love ourselves. And I think that's the answer.
Yes. I think it's super important, like the realization. It took me a long time to realize that I'm already in a relationship with myself. So it's like, I'm already in a relationship. I got my authentic self, I got the ego, and I got my inner child. And then plus I got all these sub personalities that are running the show and I'm not even there. So realistically, I'm already in like this big orgy, going on, right? And the realization of that has been super, super important. And at the same time, the understanding of that masculine and feminine energies are, something I talk about a lot, that it's like, we have both of them in us. And for me, in the last 6 months or so, where like I take my own feminine on dates, bats and rose water, different aphrodisiacs, and like I said, like orgy, right? It's happening, right? And I think that is so important, that it's something like I feel like there should be like a course, like a self-love course, because there actually a female friend of mine, we were going to collaborate on something like that. But it's so important, like self-love is super important, because and it's also, once again, self-love is like a superpower, in the sense of like, if I want that amazing queen, well, guess what? Treat yourself like you want to be treated by that amazing queen. And guess what? As you start to treat yourself like that, build boundaries and have expectations, and guess what? Those energies come into your life, right? Naturally, they start to show up. And then I'm like in a position where I'm like, no, I kind of want to continue and keep this orgy with myself, because like, I need like a very high caliber type of queen in my life. So yeah, it's so, so important, like this self-love concept. And I feel like more women should be talking about it and sharing it, because it's literally the foundation. It's like the seed, right? You plant the seed of self-love, self-worth, confidence within yourself. Guess what? That seed is going to continue to grow, and that seed will attract those type of seeds in your life and those type of energies and everything like that, right? So first of all, I just want to say, like, I have loved our conversation. Like, it is one of my favorite conversations I've had in a while. And I love to see other men that are doing this work, that are, taking charge of their life. Really, this is the foundation. You can have all the money in the world. I have friends that make millions of dollars and they call me and they're fully depressed, right? So it's like, I'm very grateful to have found at a young age that money is not everything. And I feel like, because I meet 60-year-olds that are still chasing money, or women, and I'm like, crazy. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because like 31 years old, and I'm like, here where you're still there. And it's like, so I'm very grateful for that, right? Any thoughts, anything that you want to share? Because I'm very good at asking questions and really kind of navigating an interview, but I'm always curious to like just kind of give the mic to someone and say, like, any thoughts, anything that you want to share, as even from our conversation, just anything that your heart feels called to share right now.
Yeah, I definitely want to expand on the self-love piece, right? Because that's one of my themes that I love to write on as well. And I love the rituals that you had added, right? Taking yourself on that date, right? Taking the bath, right? Grabbing the flowers. You don't hear that from another man. And I will often, when someone comes out of a relationship, right? Most of the time, the knee-jerk reaction is to replace that character with another character, right? Because that soothes the pain. And I think sometimes that happens in childhood, right? Like a toy goes missing, parent immediately runs to the store, buys a replacement toy, right? So we're taught that if something that we once loved is now no longer, we need to now replace it with something else, right? I lost the stuffed animal, I now have the blanket, right? I lost the favorite cookie, but mom got me ice cream, right? And so where does that come from, right? That's that trauma work. And yeah, the self-love piece, like we must love ourselves first. You know, don't fall to the idea of being a hopeless romantic. Become a hopeful romantic and
Yes.
romanticize yourself. Take yourself on that date. You don't have anyone to take you out on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. Get a haircut, go get dressed, right? Get your hair, makeup, nails done, look amazing, and go out. You're
Yes.
not going to attract something sitting at home swiping left or swiping right. And if you are, I
Yes.
guarantee you, it's not the type of individual you're going to want. They're probably not going to match your frequency unless yours is very suppressed. And the longer you sit in front of that phone, the more you're going to suppress your frequency.
Yes.
Right? So just because something bad happened to you doesn't mean you can't find ways to give to yourself. I often will tell others, stop giving the love away to that person who's no longer here. Start putting that love back inside.
Yes.
You could love yourself as much as you love this person. It would be such a different experience for you. So I think that is so paramount to not just healing our wounds, but to having the courage to look at those wounds and those scars. If we don't have self-love, we often struggle with forgiveness. If we don't have self-love, we often struggle with abandonment and rejection. If we don't have self-love, we probably don't have any boundaries. And so
Yes.
what we tolerate in relationships will only compound and get worse. And then we'll find ourselves in those unhealthy relationships replaying that pattern because we don't know what deal breakers are. We don't know what boundaries are because I just want to make sure my partner's happy. They're happy. I'm happy. But your partner's here.
Yes.
Right. And it's with spirit and creator and universe and self. And
Yeah.
how do you bring those energies together to be more harmonious? When they are harmonious and singing a symphony, then you're going to attract her queen and she's going to want to sit front row of that auditorium every single day.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting. Like I can literally remember, like, first of all, everything you just shared was very well said. Like it was coming from a man who has done his work and he's doing his work and he's on his journey. So I applaud that and thank you so much for sharing that. And I can clearly remember in these points in my life, the last 2-3 years, where as I started to love myself more, the caliber of the woman in my life got like just better and better. And I remember last year, okay, I was out of a relationship and one of the most beautiful relationships I've ever been. She introduced me to parts of myself that I had never even was aware of. I learned a lot from it. I'm still super grateful for her. Actually, it's so interesting. I don't know if you'll end up watching this, but like we made this shirt together. So after that, I started to learn more about self-love. And I clearly remember I took a vacation for 2 weeks. And I stayed at this place that was like $300 a night for like a week, just like spoiled myself. But before that, I didn't want to go because I wanted to go with this other girl. But then I was like, no. Like I need this for me. And I remember prior to booking this place, I was like, I just didn't want to do it. And I remember one day I'm journaling and I'm like, Mohammed, you are going to do this if you win with a girl. But because you're going by yourself and you're choosing to go by yourself, you're not going to book this expensive resort. And it was like mic drop for me. Like, so you clearly don't love yourself. Like you're willing to do this for her, but you will not do this by yourself. And I did it. I booked the trip. I bought myself a MacBook Pro. Like I spent probably like 10 grand on myself. Right. And just literally a couple of months after that, a couple of weeks after I came back from that trip, things were changing on a level that I'd never seen, you know, like just next level, all because I choose myself first. That's it. I chose myself first. And that was an example that just like one of the most beautiful examples that I can think of, that like I start to love myself more and more and more. And I started to spoil myself. I started to give myself everything. And even the thought of that there was a thought in my head that I wasn't, like all that stuff was such a healing journey for me because, and after that, now it's like for me, I almost want to get it like self-love is important as a tattoo on me, like, and because it is literally the foundation to, you know, build $1 million business, have beautiful relationships, have beautiful family support, community, everything at a high top level starts with self-love, you know, that relationship with ourselves, right?
That's our foundation, right? And
Mhm.
how we maintain that is through self-care. And
Yes.
how we guard that is through self-worth.
Mm, I
And
like
when we
that.
could align those three, then everything around us is going to elevate, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be flying in a private jet, right? But you're
Yeah.
going to improve the quality of your life because
Mm,
you're improving the quality of your life.
exactly. And I think, one of the most important thoughts that I want to share is that through this process of learning to love yourself and compassion, all this stuff, have compassion for yourself, meaning that it might not happen today, it might not look like it today that you loved yourself. Maybe you give into your urges and you texted the wifey and the ex and you drank and you smoked a joint and you watched porn and all the things you told yourself you weren't going to do and you did it. Just have compassion. The fact that you're thinking about growth, the fact that it's on your mind that something is off, you're already ahead of the game. That awareness is already, you're ahead of the game. So anyone that's listening to this podcast right now, that compassion, love, and kindness towards yourself. Don't be hard on yourself. A lot of individuals that do get into this work are highly motivated, individuals, warriors already, aware alphas, I like to call them. So through this process, don't be hard on yourself. One of the acts of self-love is to be patient with your progress. So I just wanted to share that because it's something I learned myself through my own journey, that I'm a highly, individuals in my inner circle would say that I have like a Navy SEAL attitude towards life. And it's very true when you look into my habits and the things that are going on in my life. Like I do have a Navy SEAL attitude, So learning through the journey when I was crying and going through the stuff, one of the things that helped me a lot was someone in my circle shared was that, hey, just like have compassion, like be gentle with yourself. Look where you are compared to where you were 6 months ago or a year ago. So just have love, compassion for yourself while you're in this deep work, right? um
Yeah.
Share. Okay, first of all, I just want to say, like, this has just been amazing. It's been awesome. Like for me, I'm like, I feel like, like we could probably talk for hours. I maybe get some red wine and, date nights with the brother tonight, So like, I'm super, super grateful for this conversation and just super grateful that I continue to follow my heart when I find these guests onto Instagram and whatever my heart calls to, I message the individual. So I'm so super glad that I messaged you, Paul. As we finish off this podcast, please share, last thoughts, and also how could people find you? Because I'm gonna insert your details in the details section of the podcast. So when people listen to the podcast, they're able to find you and connect with you and work with you, whatever it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I love that you added that caveat of compassion, by the way. So echo that.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, thank you. And red wine is my wine of choice. So you're speaking my love language there. I would love to come back anytime, Mohammed. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for following your heart, and I am so grateful that it led the two of us to have this wonderful dialogue.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so thank you.
And
As
where
far as
can everyone find you?
yeah, so Instagram right now is the best. So
Okay.
Instagram handle is love over limerence.
Okay.
Um, my website should launch in like the next 60 to 90 days, and that's just going to be my first and last name.com. So
Okay.
paulspinella.com
Okay.
is coming very soon.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and then in there will be details on the book and other social media resources and other ways to connect and contact me and schedule introductory calls for coaching. But in the meantime, yeah, Instagram, I'm usually pretty active on there. Feel free to DM me with any questions, thoughts. Happy to provide some perspective messaging as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. And everyone, as you're listening to this podcast, and as I finish it off, my intentions are for you to listen to this podcast and really, really let it sink in. There's once in a while you get to listen to certain things that I believe shouldn't only be entertainment, but it should only be for you to study and look deep within and try to learn something from it. And my intentions are for you to choose yourself over anything that's happening in your life. My intention is for you to find the power of healing, find the power of self-love, find the power of doing this inner work. And lastly, my intentions are for you to just realize that, you truly can change your life into a better version of yourself through understanding and paying attention to your emotions and to your experiences and to everything that's happening in your life. And lastly, as we finish off, until next time, stay an aware alpha.